Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar will be an introduction to the AWS Well-Architected Framework. So my name is Cosmin Drâmbă. I'm one of the founders of SafeInit, a Bucharest-based advanced partner for consulting and implementing AWS services. My career has revolved closely around the server side, starting with roles such as network administrator, data center technician, and Linux administrator. Over time, I evolved into a DevOps engineer and eventually took on the responsibility of a team leader. Throughout my journey, I've had the incredible opportunity to work with cloud technologies, handle countless physical server components, and navigate through various data centers. This hands-on experience with diverse server environments paved the way for my seamless transition to cloud-based solutions. Among the various cloud platforms, AWS stood out to me because of how seamlessly everything connected. I found it very easy to grasp the purpose of its services and draw connections with my prior on-premise experiences. In 2021, SafeInit achieved the select partner status with AWS, and just a year later, we proudly graduated to the advanced tier. Our company now offers a wide range of consulting and implementation services exclusively tailored for AWS, ranging from well-architected reviews, of course, to the setup of turnkey infrastructures compliant with HIPAA regulations or disaster recovery implementations. For more detailed information, feel free to refer to the QR codes provided on the slide. My colleagues will also drop the links in the chat. So this is the purpose, process, and outcomes for this session. The goal is to build a foundation for the teams in your organization that use AWS using well-architected. The main outcome of this session should be enablement. To build the internal team knowledge using the well-architected framework. As your teams are enabled based on their understanding of well-architected, the scale of adoption should increase and accelerate. The primary purpose of this session is training about well-architected. Then the training should grow the individual expertise of all participants. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about the agenda. So in this session, we will discuss what the well-architected framework is, including a brief history and the reason it was created, as well as how you can use it in your organization. Next, we will cover the framework structure and its components. We will also discuss how to use the framework to run a review on your workloads. This includes explaining what a workload is, what to consider when defining a workload, and some best practices for running successful reviews. So that brings us to our main question for today, which is, are you well architected? So considering what amazing people we have in our teams, hopefully most of us can say yes. Let's look a little bit at the history of well architected. So more than 10 years ago, AWS started actually asking its customers the question, are you well architected? AWS SA reviews started in 2013. These were customer reviews led by AWS solution architects. In 2014, the first 4 pillars emerged. We will discuss the pillars more extensively later on in this presentation. 1 year later, the official framework was published by AWS as a white paper, which was available for everybody to see. In 2016, the operational excellence pillar was added to the framework as part of customer feedback. So AWS took note of what customers were saying, part of the reviews, and they actually realized that they missed a very important pillar, which was the operational excellence, or how to actually operate your workload. 2017, AWS started training APN partners to review workloads. And then a major milestone was in 2018 when AWS launched the well-architected tool. So this is a self-service tool available in the AWS console to all AWS customers. Now everyone can run a well-architected framework review on their own workloads, and also improvement plans were added this year. Then the 6th pillar, sustainability, was announced and added in 2021 during reInvent. And I know it's not part of the slide, but there was another major update that happened this year, the AWS Well-Architected Profiles. So customers can create a profile by answering a set of predefined questions related to their current business goals and desired outcomes. Over the profile, once the profile is applied to a workload, customers are presented with a set of prioritized, well-architected questions that are aligned to their goals at that point in time. So as you can see, well-architected has evolved from a concept to a framework to a well-established practice. Nowadays, it is, or should be, part of any serious discussion related to infrastructure. You're here today, so one of the questions that you might ask yourself, why should I use the well-architected framework? Why would I want to apply it? So when AWS started asking their customers about the benefits of using the well-architected framework, they got the following feedback. For example, they could build and deploy faster by reducing firefighting, capacity management, and by using automation, you can experiment and release value more often. AWS Well-Architected puts a lot of emphasis on using automation to build systems. Less time doing manual processes, which are prone to human error, and more time spent with systems which are repeatable, evolvable, and hopefully high quality. Lower or mitigate risks. So you need to understand where you have risks in your architecture and address them before they impact your business and distract your team. That means that you have more control over which risks, under which conditions you wish to apply them. There are certain applications or workloads that you'll want to take very low risks with, and others, which are often internal applications, that can tolerate a higher risk profile. Of course, that brings us to our next point, which is making informed decisions. We can trade off the risks versus what the actual business benefits are. And of course, learning AWS best practices. Make sure your teams are aware of best practices that were published by AWS after reviewing thousands of customers' architectures. Another way to think about the well-architected framework is a mechanism for your cloud journey. A mechanism that helps you be successful in that journey. So there's a phrase coined by Amazon, namely, mechanisms give results that good intentions don't. So at the beginning of that journey, well-architected helps you learn what the best practices for building in the cloud actually are. One of the things that well-architected gives you, which as an engineer is something that I actually find very valuable, is a way to objectively measure architectures and to be able to answer the question, is this architecture following best practices? Lastly, and the most important part about conducting a well-architected review is not to actually know that you have risk. It's to give you a reason to improve your architecture. Now we're ready to answer the question, what exactly is the AWS Well-Architected Framework, right? You've heard me talk on and on about this, but we don't know what exactly it is. So at the very basis, it consists of sets of questions and design principles, or just common ways about thinking about cloud design, spread across 6 pillars or categories. But pillars sounds nicer, doesn't it? So we'll get to that later. We also have this concept of lenses. So to fully evaluate your workloads and industry scenarios, you can use applicable lenses from the well-architected framework along with the management and governance lens. Well-architected lenses extend the guidance offered by AWS Well-Architected to specific industry and technology domains, such as machine learning, analytics, serverless applications, high-performance computing, IoT, and financial services. So in 2021, custom lenses were released at re:Invent. These features was requested by many AWS customers, so they could create their own custom lenses specific to their needs and environment. So lenses are just, basically extra questions that you can ask besides the basic ones from the standard well-architected framework. Let's talk a little bit about the pillars, right? So we discussed this briefly. It's easy to understand why AWS has chosen pillars as the terminology. Many times, building virtual architectures has been compared to constructing a building. You have certain things that you need to get right to begin with, i.e. a strong foundation, in order to build what you want on top of it. So if we neglect one of the fundamental pillars, it's going to be hard for that construction to be safe and easy to use. And it's also going to find it harder to deliver on what it's intended for. So when you incorporate these pillars, it will help you produce stable and efficient systems, allowing you to focus on functional requirements. So let's take a look at each of the foundational pillars and discuss them in detail. So first we have the operational excellence, which is the ability to run and monitor systems to deliver business value and continually improve, supporting processes and procedures. So we actually define operational excellence as a commitment to build software correctly while consistently delivering a great customer experience. It contains best practices for organizing your team, designing your workload, operating it at a scale, and of course, evolving it over time. Operational excellence helps your team to focus more of their time on building new features that benefit customers, and less time on maintenance and firefighting. To build correctly, we look to best practices that result in well-running systems, a balanced workload for you and your team, and most importantly, a great customer experience. The next pillar, security, which, very, very important one, is the ability to protect information, systems, and assets while delivering business value through risk assessments and mitigation strategies. So the security pillar focuses on protecting information and systems. Key topics include confidentiality and integrity of data, managing user permissions, and establishing controls to detect security events. The next pillar, reliability. This is the ability of a system to recover from infrastructure or service failure. Because, as we all know, everything fails all the time, right? We need to mitigate disruptions such as misconfigurations or transient network issues. So the reliability pillar focuses on workloads performing their intended functions and how to recover quickly from failure to meet demands. Key topics include distributed system design, recovery planning, and adapting to changing requirements. Next, we have the performance efficiency, which is the ability to use computing resources efficiently to meet system requirements and to maintain that efficiency as demand changes and technologies evolve. Some of the key topics include selecting resource types and sizes optimized for workload requirements, monitoring performance, and maintaining efficiency as business needs evolve. Cost optimization, right? The ability to avoid or eliminate unneeded costs or suboptimal resources. We have such key topics as understanding spending over time and controlling fund allocation, selecting resources of the right type and quantity, and scaling to meet business needs without overspending. And then we have the newest addition to the pillars, which is sustainability. So this is how AWS provides guidance that can help you reduce your footprint and best practices you can use to improve the sustainability of your workloads. Such key topics are shared responsibility model for sustainability, understanding the impact that your services might have, and maximizing utilization to minimize required resources and reduce downstream impacts. As mentioned before, design principles are common ways of thinking about cloud design. So the purpose of the design principles is to get you thinking why the actual best practices exist. There are general design principles for the cloud. So what do you need to think about when you're designing for the cloud? And then for the respective pillars, there are additional design principles which will help you drive your thinking as to why you would want to implement a best practice. So let's take a look at this classic security best practice, which is to automate responses to security events. This is derived from the security pillars design principle, namely automate security best practices. So if there's any confusion at any point about the best practice, you can always go back either to the general design principle or the pillar specific design principle to understand why that best practice is actually needed. So let's talk a bit about the general design principles. So cloud computing has opened up the technology space, right, to a whole new world of thinking where constraints we used to have in the traditional environment, i.e. on-prem, no longer exist. So when thinking about general design principles, it's interesting to contrast with how you would think about this in a traditional environment. You had to guess how much infrastructure you needed, often based on very high level business requirements and demand, often before a line of code is written. You could not afford to test at scale. Complete duplicate of production costs is hard to justify, especially with low utilization. So when you went into production, you normally found a whole new class of issues at high scale. Any proof of concepts or architectural experimentation was done by hand and was generally only done at the start of the project. You generally had static architectures and it was difficult to even think about making a change. You generally couldn't generate data sets that would allow you to make informed decisions. So you probably used models and assumptions to size your architecture. Finally, in a traditional environment, you would only exercise your runbook when something bad happened in production. In the cloud, constraints have been removed. So you can use these principles to take advantage of that. So that was actually a very good segue into our next topic, which is actually performing the well-architected framework review. So let's talk a little bit about the intent of a review. I actually really like this slide. It starts with the first thing we actually tell our customers when talking about the well-architected review process. Namely that this is not an audit. You're not failing something if you conduct a well-architected review and discover that you have risks. We're trying to work together with you to improve your architectures and, more importantly, improve your future architectures. As you continue to build things, you'll build them well to begin with. It's not about blaming someone about the mistakes that they've made. It's really about a consultation on how do I look at this architecture and how can I make it better. Secondly, the best practices and the design principles are derived from real-world scenarios, and they offer pragmatic, proven advice. You're not going to have to study deeply to understand what the best practice states. It should be fairly straightforward for you to understand, and it should be based on things that you've also seen being successful as well. Lastly, we need to emphasize that this is not a one-time check. If we run a review and improve, we go back and look at it again and mark it as improved. We don't want to have a static architecture that we need to rebuild every few years because we haven't continued to evolve it. Periodical checks are actually mandatory. For example, you are planning to distribute your software product through AWS Marketplace. You need to pass a foundational technical review check, and one of the items in the checklist is running periodical reviews on your workload. And you'll actually find that a lot of the questions in the foundational technical review overlap with the question found in the well-architected framework. So there are a few ways to actually conduct a review. The simplest is the self-service, right? As I mentioned, you have access to the tool. This is the reason why the well-architected tool exists. You can go in the AWS console, navigate to the tool, and evaluate your architecture according to the best practices. Usage of the tool is free of charge. If I forgot to mention that, I apologize. As we can see, there are a couple of flavors for the self-service option. We have the individual and the team. So the individual should be done in preparation for the team review. Somebody actually needs to go through the tool, to get accustomed to the feel on how to answer questions, to understand what the required stakeholders that should be part of the review, right? Because you know your organization better than anyone, and you know who might be able to answer those specific questions. The team review option is a good way to prepare for an AWS or partner-led review, but requires, of course, more time commitment and schedule synchronization. AWS partners who have gone through training and passed the rigorous enrollment process are part of the well-architected program. So a partner-led review often happens when the customer has a shortage of skilled resources and when they need to get their workloads improved rather quickly. As an added bonus is that we can consider an added bonus the fact that partners can actually engage in hands-on work, which is required for remediating workloads. And the final option is to engage with AWS SAs directly. So this happens on a best effort basis. So you may want to engage with them for particularly critical workloads, the main business drivers, right? If you would like to hear more about this option, you can, and I encourage you to contact your AWS account manager directly. So let's talk a little bit about partner-led reviews, right? Because this is something that I can definitely speak more on. And we're going to talk later about a real-world customer success story as a result of using the well-architected framework. But I just want you to know how the partner-led review model works. So first of all, you can engage with a well-architected partner from the list published by AWS, right? You can see it at the top of the slide. So let's say, off the top of my head, let's name SafetyNet. In most cases, including ourselves, partners usually review architectures for free over the course of how many sessions are needed to go over at least 20 questions. If I'm not mistaken, I think there are about 60 questions total as part of the well-architected review framework over the course of the 6 pillars. So we engage with you, we plan 1 or 2 sessions, 2-hour sessions, depending on how long it takes us to go over the minimum of 20 questions. We can go over all of them if needed. And the deliverable is a statement of work which highlights the high-risk items found during the review and a remediation plan. Now, normally the remediation steps cost money to be implemented, right? So if you want to have a business justification behind that, AWS will offset some of those costs by giving you $5,000 in AWS credits if at least 45% of the HRIs are resolved. So as an example, let's say that we have reviewed 20 questions from your on your workload. We have found 10 high-risk items, and we have managed to remediate 5 of those, right? If we manage to do that together, then we will apply for a funding request, and you will get, as part of that, 5K in AWS credits. AWS wants you to be successful, right? Because if you are, then you're more likely to continue working with AWS and continue to make architectures better. So as I said, let's look at a real world customer success story. This is a very dear customer of ours, which we've worked on recently, called Asociația TechSoup Romania. So their main challenge as a non-profit organization, they needed to reduce costs, right, while maintaining the performance of their environment. They had over allocation of resources resulting in unnecessary costs. They lacked proper security controls, increasing the risk of data breaches and unauthorized access. And there was insufficient logging and monitoring, right, which actually made it quite difficult to detect and to respond to security incidents. But their main concern, like the main business driver for going into well-architected, were the unnecessary costs, right, that they felt that they were part of. So after conducting the review, we actually managed to achieve 50% infrastructure cost reduction in the first month, right? We got them on a savings plan. We right-sized their RDS database instances and transitioned their environment, their non-production environment to Spot instances. And their production environment, we mixed their own demands with Spot instances. We also managed to enhance their security by securing the AWS account, by relying on a centralized identity provider, and by implementing a web application firewall. Now, these are just a few of the enhancements that we've delivered. And as part of it, of course, we were able to obtain for them the $5,000 in AWS credits. So the full case study is available here. You have the link on the screen, and my colleagues will also drop the link in the chat for you to be able to study at or to look over it at your own leisure. So let's discuss some of the learnings that AWS has passed on from running tens of thousands of well-architected reviews. The first thing is that conducting reviews only as part of the pre-launch process is not the best option. Doing reviews earlier in your design process makes a massive difference. The earlier you catch a defect, the less it costs, right? So, for example, trying to introduce security towards the end of the process is going to be pretty painful. Think about modifying your code to not use access keys and secret access keys, but instead leverage the Secrets Manager API for secure storage and retrieval of sensitive data, right? This will definitely need some refactoring from your development team. So this is just one example. And we're not even touching more critical aspects or high-level aspects, such as data classification or regulations that might apply to that data. Nobody wants to get into a situation where they might actually need to take down the thing that they previously launched, right? Because the risks are not actually justified. Second, people are not making conscious decisions to implement bad architectures. That is not what's happening. Usually it's because they were literally unaware of what the best practice was. Often they bring in previous experience. So things that worked well in on-premise data centers have different solutions in the cloud. Other times people just forget to do things. So having a consistent review process is just a way of reminding yourself how to do that. Lastly, most architectures can be improved. Finding high-risk items shouldn't be a shock. It's very much expected. Surfacing them means you can now make an informed decision about where to invest and what you're going to do about those things. The approach can be something like, hey, in the next sprint, besides working on these features, we're going to also pick up these high or medium risk items for the review and remediate them. These use cases we have seen customers adopt around the well-architected. First and foremost, if you or your teams have ever asked, how should we do this in the cloud? Or how are others doing this in the cloud? Or even how does AWS recommend we do this? Then yeah, this is a good use case for you. The well-architected framework contains a set of best practices that AWS has developed and acquired through over a decade of designing and operating workloads with their customers. The framework will expose those best practices to anyone that is searching for them. Some customers also use the framework as a way to define the best practices and standards that they lay out for their technology teams to adopt. So using this tool, teams can measure their workloads against defined governance standards. As you start to look at systems and think about moving them into production, the well-architected review process allows you to look at the architecture and say, where are the deficiencies in the architectures? And as a business, do we need to accept the risks or do we need to address them before going into production? One of the tricky aspects of all governance processes is doing them in a repeatable manner and making sure you've covered all the same topics. With the well-architected framework used across your technology portfolio, you can get an aggregate view of how your teams are maturing and where there might be consistent areas that need improvement focus across organizations and teams. Most modern businesses are dependent on the technology stacks that they are running. However, as a business, you don't always have a viewpoint of what that technology portfolio looks like. So how do you know as a business where the risks are in your technology portfolio? What is that technology portfolio? And consequently, where should you be investing time and effort? So we've mentioned workloads, right? A workload is not just made up of technology components. It is also made up of the people and processes. You'll often find questions in the well-architected review that reference key personnel or plans and procedures, as well as the actual infrastructure and service components. So this is a quote from the well-architected framework. A workload identifies a set of components that together deliver business value. The workload is usually the level of detail that the business and technology leaders communicate about. Example of workloads are marketing websites, e-commerce websites, the backends for a mobile app, analytic platforms, etc. Workloads vary in levels of architecture complexity, from static websites to architectures with multiple data stores and many components. I often find that if you start reviewing a workload and the conversation continually diverges on certain areas, it can be a sign that the workloads needs dividing further. One other aspect that we found through our reviews, a workload doesn't necessarily mean a separate or a single AWS account, right? It can mean the application that is sitting inside a region. It can mean an application that is sitting inside the VPC and sharing actually that VPC with other workloads. So it's up to your organization and what you believe to be a workload on how to actually define it and what to review as part of it. Here are a few key concepts to consider before doing a review. As we mentioned before, we're looking to define what is a workload. The people and teams, processes and runbooks, and technology and infrastructure that deliver business value to a customer. Then we have a workload sponsor, right? The person at the company ultimately responsible for the success of the workload to the company board and or shareholders. That person has funding and headcount authority. Lastly, we're interested in the pillar sponsors. So these are subject matter experts for the pillar or lens that can actually authoritatively answer questions and own high risk item mitigation for that pillar or lens. There are 3 phases to running a well-architected review. First one is prepare. So as we mentioned, define the workload, identify the key sponsor, and agree on review strategy and schedule. So preparation is key, right? Understanding boundaries on other workloads. How do we actually limit that workload, right? How do we define it? Then we have the review. We run the review using the well-architected tool and take notes, right? We always need to be aware, very aware of the context. So if you go into the well-architected review tool and you answer some questions, you will see that on all questions, you actually have the option to mark it as, not relevant for your particular workload. Maybe you don't actually need to even consider it, right? Because all workloads, all applications are different. So you give a reason, you mark it as, non-important, and you document it and you move on, right? And once the review is done and you have the report, you have the guide phase. So you review the report and the improvement plan. You carry out prioritization exercise to turn risks into solutions and improvements. Create some actionable steps moving forward. The well-architected process, as I mentioned before, is a cycle, right? Much like the Amazon and the AWS flywheels. By running reviews on one workload, teams will learn and be empowered to run reviews with other teams on their workloads and also share lessons learned. Lesson learned from workload review can often be used to improve others through shared AWS organizational changes or shared architecture patterns, right? So it's a continuous learning process for sure. So we've reached the last section. Thank you for being with us so far. My colleagues will also drop the webinar survey link in the chat for you to fill if you're planning to leave before we're finished. Otherwise, you'll also have the opportunity to complete the survey at the end of the session. So let's move on what is available in the well-architected framework. When we think well-architected as a whole, there are really 3 components that work together. We have the content, we have the tool, and we have the data. So the content is the framework, the helpful resources, everything that we've talked about included in the well-architected framework, and now your custom lenses. Then we have the tool, which helps you carry out those framework reviews as well as your custom lens data. And then you get the data. The data is all of that combined into what decisions you've made, what your risks are, and notes that you've taken to really help you understand how the content and the tool are integrated into your organization. So as you can see on the screen, there are many different ways that the content, tool, and data overlap, and that's really where you can scale well-architected into your organization. Next, we're going to talk about how you can really dive deeper into the well-architected framework concepts. First, AWS has published the content on a dedicated website. The website contains the whole framework, so it's easy to link to a particular section. You can access the map by clicking the logo, and from the map, you can jump to any section. Next, we have the well-architected labs. So this is a really cool feature from AWS that I like most of their labs. So the labs will allow you to go through the pillars and the well-architected tool at your own pace. I'd like to recommend to everyone to go through these labs. And actually, if there's a demand from your side, perhaps we can schedule a more hands-on session and go through this together. Let's see. So we've reached the end of our presentation. And again, I'd like to ask you to take a minute to complete our survey. It really helps us a lot. The link has been also dropped in the chat. If there are any questions in the chat, I'd be happy to take them on. If not, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and definitely hope to see you at our next one. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.